Tolkien geeks, and welcome to Voice of Geekdom Live. I'm your host Dan, and we're here today to talk about another episode of The Rings of Power, episode 5 this week, which was quite an interesting episode with a little bit of kind of lore controversy to talk about this week, which I know that we're all going to have some views on. It's really great to see all of you, and it's good to see the chat active. As you can see, I've got an amazing panel this week. So first of all, we have returning guest, my good friend Matt from Nerd of the Rings, who probably requires no introduction to most of you. Matt's been on before for a pre-recorded podcast in the past, but this is the first time making a live stream appearance, and it's great to have you on, my friend, because we always have such good discussions, either in private on our private Discord server where we talk about things, or in public like this. And so it's a great pleasure to have you on. Below Matt, we've got Varking Runesong, from the podcaster, the host of that Varking podcast, and Varking is doing Reddit interviews of the cast at the moment, so you can get weekly interviews with cast members. And he's just come from a couple of hours ago recording an interview with Nori's actor, so definitely check that out. Below me, last but certainly not least, is a friend of mine who I met recently. I've said it several times on the channel now. I was at MythMoot in Washington, D.C. back in June at Signum University's kind of big annual literary conference. And Jeff was one of the keynote speakers there. Jeff is a published fantasy author, works as a production editor for Tor Macmillan Books. And you blog about Tolkien and Lord of the Rings a lot as well. Something I have great respect for as a thinker about Tolkien, and I'm excited to introduce you to people and for people to meet you in this way, because this isn't like a normal thing for you, as opposed to my other two esteemed guests who are broadcasting on the internet all the time, every week. So it's a really, really cracking panel this week. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this all week, and we've got a lot to talk about, so we should probably get into it as soon as possible. But yeah, I'll just throw it to the panel and just get your thoughts, I think, like at a high level on what we saw this week and whether you liked it. And we'll probably go through and talk about each kind of plot line in turn, I think. I just checking out the chat here. I see we've got Nick Palazzo as well, who was my guest from a couple of weeks ago from the Film Project. Somebody else who I met at MythMoot, who I guess you know as well, Jeff. We've got Christian Fiorito. We've got Alison Kreutzberg, my moderator. Kate Patinsky, my other moderator. We've got Exthelion of the Fountain. Yeah, if you're watching, I always like to say this when I start out. Just let me know where you're watching from in the world, because it's always a little thrill to me to see where you're all watching from. It's the middle of the night here in the UK, and so people are watching at all times of day all around the world, and it's always great to see. As we're going through as well, bear in mind that we will kind of riff off of each other and talk about different things and go off on tangents, but if you want to get your opinion across, bear in mind that the super chat function is available, and that if you want to get your opinion heard and you want us to discuss your views and questions about the show, we will stop everything and take a look at what you have to say. So something to bear in mind. It's a great way to support the channel as well, and it helps me to bring more content to you in the future. But yeah, let's start. I think let's start with Jeff. I'll go in reverse order as I introduced you. So, what did you think about this week's episode and the kind of various controversies and plot lines and the developments that we saw this week?
No pressure. I will start by saying that I generally am pretty good at separating book from adaptation. This one's starting to go off the rails even there, so that, I can't help that. But there's so much still to like, but there's obviously some decisions made here that are very worrying, and I know we'll get to that specifically. But there is still a lot, even in this episode, that I really enjoyed, and I remain optimistic in general. Like I know that they're making different decisions for a TV show. So I think this is a long-term thing. As much as it feels like they're painting themselves into a corner and now they got to get out of it. Like I think they intended this, and it's so early that there's got to be a bigger picture explanation to some of what we're seeing that's so alarming to Tolkien book readers. But I actually still enjoyed the majority of this episode.
Yeah, I find each week I'm enjoying it more and more analyzing this show. I don't know whether I would be enjoying it as a viewer as much as I'm enjoying it as somebody who's like discussing it every week and making videos and discussing it with other creators every week. I'm fortunate to have you find people to have to talk about this stuff, I suppose. I wonder whether I would enjoy it in the same way if I wasn't doing what I'm doing. But yeah, let's go to Varking and we'll go back in reverse clockwise order.
So for me, not my absolute most favorite episode, but I think anytime you have a strong batch of dwarves in it, with how well they're doing the dwarves, not all can be bad. Obviously, Durin Durin and Elrond are like the stars of the show in my eyes. They're really killing it with every bit of screen time and opportunity that they get. There are things that I think are taking quite long. The Numenorian storyline, I thought at the end of the other episode, they were ready to sail. And now we've gone through a whole nother episode and we're now ready to sail. So that's taking a little bit long for me. But we got back to the Harfoots this week on this episode, kind of advancing that storyline. The stranger has gone from not being able to talk at all to he's starting to put, like a sentence together here. Like real proud of him for being able to pick it up so early. But Numenorian stuff, it's got to come up a little bit, even kind of the Southlands stuff. But I think the Dwarven stuff, and I know people on the internet are not the happiest right now with a certain thing that dwarves mind that elves need currently. But I think, as Adar once said, you have been told many lies about Middle Earth. And I think maybe we'll kind of get into that today.
And Matt, I've kind of talked to you a little bit about the episode already, but what did you think about this week's developments?
So it's ironic because I felt like this episode had some of the best pacing of any of the episodes, because that's been one of my frustrations is in previous episodes, I'd get really invested in a storyline and then it'd cut when I felt like it was getting good. Whereas this one felt like they cut when the story had been told of that, like that they had told what they needed to tell and then they cut to something else. And so it felt better from a pacing aspect. On the flip side, there were the, obvious lore changes or creations, or however we want to phrase that, that I'm not sold on and not necessarily the biggest fan of. Like Varking kind of hinted at, I think there's reason to think that some of those are not true within the show itself. So I'm not freaking out about it quite yet, but they were definitely things on first watch that I was like, I don't know if I like that. As Varking said as well, I'm of a similar mind. Like the fact that we're now waiting for the 6th episode of 8 episodes, and we are just now getting to Numenorian sailing to Middle Earth. It just feels like it's taken us a long time to not go very far. And I don't know if maybe that's because there's so many main characters. I know they've boasted about, 23 main characters or something, 22. And I'm like, maybe we should have had a little fewer main characters and just had a little bit more happening and given more time to the, to a tighter core of characters. Characters like Farazan is one that every time he's involved with something, I'm interested. And, I feel like so far in what little we've seen of him, I really like, and I think he's heading in a good direction for what we know will come of his character. But I'm gonna start rambling now. But all in all, I would say it was a well-paced episode, but not necessarily my favorite episode.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's starting to hit its stride in terms of the actual internal story that they're telling, but it's starting to feel less like Tolkien. And I was hoping for the opposite. I was hoping that we were going to get closer to the storylines that we know. And
there's
that's not really happening,
elements,
or it's happening very slowly.
Yeah, there's elements that feel like, not to stroke Varking's ego too much, but the dwarves, I'm just kidding, because I'm a huge fan of dwarves too. So it brings me great joy to say, like, the Khazad-dûm elements and that storyline has been nailing it. Like, every time they've been in Khazad-dûm, I've been like, all right, yeah, here comes the good stuff. Like the and the way a specific example was how they had the really heartfelt story of Elrond talking about Eärendil and that lesson to Durin, and then that they didn't like undercut that moment with comedy, but they like gradually, got you to where the mood lightened in like a natural way, with Disa talking about how Elrond and Durin met. I thought that was like a really good transition. And then we go into Durin talking with his father, and that again felt very Tolkienian to me. So like there's elements that to me personally like feel very Tolkienian, but then there's moments and elements that don't. So mixed bag. Yeah.
Even in a way, and let's get into it now. I think the Mithril storyline, the story that was told of the Song of the Hithaiclir, which is the Elvish word for the Misty Mountains. That whole aside that we got was something that came out of left field, and it was very odd to tie that in with the fading of the elves. But even that there is a kernel of Tolkienian storytelling there, in as much as doing a myth within a myth is a very Tolkien thing to do. It's not unprecedented for that kind of storytelling trope to exist in Tolkien's works. What I would say is that the problems that it has is the implications of it. It's what it does to the elvish metaphysics, and the fact that elves are tied to the world of Arda is my problem with it. It's the fact that elves have this serial longevity in which they are fading over the process of time, and maybe this is tied in with the whole fact that they're condensing the timeline so much, and that everything is so immediate and everything's happening all at once. But it's a problem for me to view elves in the way that they're now being presented by this show. And secondarily, the problem is Gil-galad and what it's done to him as a character, because he's coming across as this kind of deceitful politician, which is not how we think of him in The Lord of the Rings, as he's described by numerous characters. Sam sings a song about him. Elrond talks his praises. He's a character who we were led to believe by the books was a champion of good in the Second Age, and who led the fight against Sauron and died for it, and that's what we're leading up towards. But it's going to be interesting how they're going to redeem that character after what they've done to him in this first season, because I had some problems with his portrayal in the first episode, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to be charitable here and assume that there's an explanation for this. And I feel like this episode was the explanation for that. And it's kind of feeling worse now for me, not better.
Yeah, but the golden ticket to Valinor thing was odd to me as well.
I think Gil-galad seems like the living embodiment of the "don't meet your heroes" warning, which is a shame, because he's such a hero and we're supposed to like him, we thought. But he's a different Gil-galad, no question.
What if in episode 1 or maybe 2, when we meet Elrond and he's not invited to the Elf Lord only meeting, what if that meeting is a meeting with Anatar, where Anatar is attempting to influence the elves, and Gil-galad, being as wise as he is, understands the influence that's going on, and he's not fully trying to stop what he think might be going on, because he's sort of playing 4D chess, and he wants to keep things close and keep an eye on it. And that's why he wants to make sure that, like, later in the episode, when you see Durin and Elrond kind of walking back, he's keeping an eye on them. He's not fully fooled, but it's not been explained yet. Like you said, I'm trying to be charitable with it. I have a whole theory as to what's going on here, and maybe we'll get into it later. But I think if you just take things at face value, right now, Gil-galad does not look like the character that we've sort of expected.
Yeah, and we were chatting a little bit before we started streaming, and I said this in my breakdown, like, I'm okay with, him being a little bit more of a jerk. I think, it might be a little much right now. But at the end of the day, like, by the time of the War Last Alliance, like, we have to be fully on board with him. Like, we've got to feel his death when it comes, like it'd be weird if, I think people are already behind Elendil. Like, people already love
look at him.
that depiction and everything. And so, like, I'm already looking at like his death scene and thinking like, oh, that's going to be epic. But like Gil-galad, I'm like, oh, well, he's kind of a jerk. So who's going to miss him? Like, why give the harpers a reason to sadly sing, instead of, otherwise the song would be like, remember that jerk of a king we had? He did that one good thing and that was it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we do know about Gil-galad early on in the Second Age is that he was the one guy who was kind of aware of the fact that evil was rising in the east. He didn't quite know it yet, but we know from the story of of Eldarion and Erendis, which is one of the only narratives that we have of the Númenórean setting, as it were. We know that he approached the Númenóreans early and tried to establish an alliance with them because he knew that evil was still at work.
Yeah.
And in the first episode, I had this impression of him that he was just naive.
Yeah.
And that he didn't think that evil was still there. And then we got this kind of conversation with him and Elrond, where it seemed as though he was just kind of like trying to sweep things under the rug and ignore it.
Yeah.
You could take it both ways. But now we know that evil will sweep over the land and that it will be the end of not just our people, but all peoples. Which
I don't really understand why. Well, I guess he does say that they foresaw something with Galadriel, like causing the doom or something like that. So I guess there's that. You would think having a powerful elf like Galadriel with you, if there's impending doom, would be a good thing. But yeah, it's a very odd dynamic going on between those characters right now.
I think the way I tried to look at that conversation, that when he was talking about Galadriel and her kind of fanning the flames, it was more like he kind of knows that there's evil around, but he feels like if he keeps her around, it may, rise to the top much sooner than what is anticipated or expected. And that's why he's willing to kind of send her off to, maybe go heal in Valinor and that whole dynamic. But my personal theory is that Anatar has found a way to influence like Celebrimbor early, and that started a whole chain of events to kind of where we are now with the dwarves, the elves, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, all of them.
Don't you think that would require a lot of sort of flashbacks and to explain all of that? If there's an Anatar-like figure, they'd have to show it or tell it. They don't seem to want to do too many full-blown flashbacks in this show. The prologue was kind of the closest thing to an extended flashback. So therefore, they'd have to make some reference. They'd have to, in the dialogue, talk about what has happened. And then you'd have to look back at that council, the Elf Lords only and all that, right?
Which is why I think maybe they've been saving flashbacks, maybe for the last episode. Halbrand gave Galadriel the blueprint on how to win a war. He told them that, you need to find out what your enemy fears, and then you need to give them a means to conquer that fear. Elrond has talked about how he fears not being able to live up to his father's legacy or legend. And Celebrimbor, if he was influenced, uses this fear because every time Celebrimbor is near Elrond, he brings up his dad and that legacy. He told him at one point that his father did what he did because he's the only one that could do it. On the flip side, he's telling him right now with the dwarves in this alliance, you're the only one that can do it. What if Anatar has somehow placed the blight in the tree that makes Gil-galad fear that the elves are going to fade and have to, step away from Middle Earth? and that he has Celebrimbor worried that he's not left any sort of major impact in the world. And, maybe he tries to use that fear by telling him, I need you to craft something that's going to have the light of the Eldar in it, and that's going to save our people from fading. And what if Anatar uses the story of the elf versus the Balrog at the tree, to get people to like believe, this is how you two can conquer this fear. Lightning struck this tree, and Mithril was now infused with the light of the Silmarils, and this is why we need it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a true story in universe. Even Elrond is a little bit like, I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah.
But he calls it apocryphal, doesn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My assumption is that it's not a true story, and that's why it was told in such a storybook type of way.
Yeah. It wasn't in a flashback way. Like, it was very so Cliff from the One Ring and I were texting about this earlier today, actually. It's not quite the stylistic difference, but he likened it to like the Hermione in Deathly Hallows telling the story of the three brothers, how there's a transition, and it's very clearly a more mythical presentation. So it kind of has that more storybook feel to it. I'm of the same mind. Like, I don't think that there was a Silmaril in a tree and it created Mithril, and I could very easily see this playing out, that they try this and they get Mithril and it doesn't work. And that's where Anatar comes in. And maybe it's that Anatar's only, like, I'm kind of hoping that Anatar is already influencing Celebrimbor and he's like pulling strings behind the scenes. Primarily because I'm not terribly crazy about any of the candidates presented so far for Sauron. But I could also see Sauron, being revealed after Mithril doesn't do what they think it's going to do, because it's not actually this salvific material for elves. And then, Sauron comes in and says, oh, you seem to have this problem. I think I can help. And that's where the whole thing, goes downhill for them.
Let me ask, unless this is something I've missed, why do we think they know about Mithril in the first place? They seem to know beforehand, right? They're sending Elrond to go find out whether this is true or not. And then Celebrimbor says he's tested it under duress. Like, where did he get a sample? Doesn't it seem like there's more going on? I mean, it seemed like Elrond had the only sample outside the mountain right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Celebrimbor says that he's tested it under duress, and that implies that they have a supply of it already.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, in the books, like we know that Vingalot had Mithril in it,
right?
And it's implied that there was Mithril in Aman, and
Numenor.
Numenor had Mithril. Yeah. So we can't really rely on the books here, of course. But
no.
So sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt.
So my read on that is, like, Gil-galad points out, when him and Durin are going back and forth and neither one of them wants to reveal anything to the other, Gil-galad points out that, like, their forges or something are busier than ever before. And so I think that's a hint that the dwarves are up to something. And then Durin turns around and says, like, hey, where did you get this table? It only appears at certain depths. Why are you? So apparently there's elves mining something somewhere or digging somewhere. So I don't know if it's like the elves have actually stumbled across a bit of Mithril themselves, perhaps. The table thing was hilarious, by the way. Like, that was the funniest
one of the highlights.
Yes, that was like the funniest moment in the entire show so far, when Durin revealed that, like, he totally made all of it up. I was like, that is amazing. How much of a fool this dwarf just made all these elves look. And I loved it.
Well, Theus has been wanting to do a table. That's excellent, yeah.
I think it was a nice little bit of character development, too. Up until this point, we've had Elrond and Disa sort of twisting the truth or telling a lie here or there in that, like, 3-person relationship. And Durin, outside of, like, how did he and Disa meet and how did he and Elrond meet, like, he hasn't told a lie yet. He's kind of been on the higher end of that. So now he has his instance where he tells a lie, and Elrond knows now he definitely was making stuff up there, and he didn't have a problem with it because he understood what was going on at the dinner table clearly Gil-galad had an agenda as soon as they got there. And Durin, dwarves, typically you wouldn't put them in a room with the way that they've been presented in the past and think that they're going to one-up anybody politically. But Durin was very quick-witted and spun it around immediately. And he was like, oh, we're busy? I think Lyndon's been busy too. And you guys normally take a couple weeks just to decide to, do your thing. I thought that it's nice to give them something that, we're not always used to seeing on screen, for instance.
Yeah, he's quite an atypical sort of dwarf, isn't he? Because as you say, they're not natural diplomats, and I enjoyed that too. And it kind of it goes to why he and Elrond are friends as well, because we saw Elrond a couple of episodes ago doing the kind of detective thing when he discovered the mine and did the thing where he knocked on the stone and found his way into the secret mine, etc. And that was his kind of detective moment. And now we're seeing Durin kind of do the same thing in reverse. So yeah, I like that. I liked it too.
I'd like to bring up a critique I have of the show, and that is that sometimes it feels like time is passing in the storylines at a much different speed depending on who we're following in that moment. In that scene, Celebrimbor is handing the mithril back to Elrond. It could have been an overnight thing where Celebrimbor took it, went to the forge or whatever, and had been working on it and testing it and then giving it back. We see the Harfoots travel all along the map, and we don't know how much time has passed. There's been a few instances where things have gone on, and I'm left going, how much time had passed? Is everything kind of together right now?
Kind of Star Wars time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's very... Do you have the impression that the scenes we're jumping back and forth between are meant to be coinciding at all? I mean, it seems... Right, the Harfoots travel, that alone has that same period of time passed over in Numenor. Are they training for weeks, maybe? We don't know. And it's
10 days, apparently.
10 days?
That's what they said, was that they would leave in 10 days at the end of the last episode. Yeah, I thought the same thing, because that's not a short journey either from Khazad-dûm to Lindon. At the end of the episode, they're like, well, it's a long walk. It's like, yeah, it's a long walk. Dude, that's gonna take you a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but we see the Fellowship of the Ring do it in the Fellowship of the Ring. We see that happen.
Yeah,
clearly takes weeks.
Montage, yeah.
I imagine between episodes, the distance between Numenor and future Mordor, that's a pretty big distance. That ought to explain some stuff, right? To see how much happens elsewhere. And unless we're going to see some of that voyage significantly.
Yeah. And speaking of the time, I've seen some people theorize that I think it's because of how it was edited, where it showed Halbrand, he says you don't know what I did to survive. You don't know what we did to survive. And then it's showing the arrival of the defectors, I guess you could say.
And
Rowan. It shows them arriving with Adar. And so people have been thinking that the kid, Rowan, is Halbrand.
In the past.
So they're thinking this whole Southlands thing is in the past or something. Which I don't know. The show hasn't seemed that clever yet to do something like that. So I'm not. I don't think that that's the case. But I think it goes to show that nobody knows how time is working.
I think there's too many other connections, Gil-galad calling peace and then recalling the Watchtower. Those things you'd have to go back and explain what they really meant then. That's
If he were Rowan, then he wouldn't have been lying to Galadriel when he says that you don't know what I did, and that it was orcs who drove me away from my home, because at that Tower of Ostirith, obviously they were getting driven out. And maybe when that scene cuts and we think Waldreg kills Rowan, maybe he does something to kind of get out of it, or he turns the blade and he kills Waldreg, and then maybe he runs off after that trying to get away from everything. But I'm not a believer in it. But just based on what I've read, that's kind of where it comes from, and that's how folks would be trying to make sense of it.
I don't think that would be evil enough an act for Halbrand to say that to Galadriel about, you wouldn't trust me anymore either. Okay, you defended yourself once and killed a guy. I don't think that would be enough anyway.
I think he was in the place that Waldreg was in, where he had to kill somebody.
Yes, that seems plausible.
On the raft, it was mentioned by one of the other people on the raft, somebody who died, and there was I don't remember the name or exactly what the line was, but it was something about some regret that in the recent past that they'd had over somebody dying. I'd have to go back and rewatch that. I haven't had time to do that yet, but my assumption is that something similar happened with him, and that's why the editing placed that scene with Rowan in the middle of that scene with Galadriel and Halbrand, because we're supposed to be making that connection, but not that these are the same people.
Not a literal connection, just a similar tone. Yeah.
Let's talk about Halbrand a little, actually, because we got some new developments with him this week. He seems to be accepting the role that fate has placed him in now, and Galadriel had a real kind of a good character moment, actually, probably her first real strong character moment for me, where she kind of broke down a bit and made some kind of progress in terms of understanding her own feelings and her sort of sense of PTSD that she has, which on the one hand I liked because it's good character development, but doesn't feel very typically Elvish to me. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. It should be an interesting side topic as we think about this. But Halbrand, I think we're being teased that this guy might be Sauron, sort of clearly. I mean, one of you talked about the scene where, I think it was you, Varking, talked about the scene where he was telling Galadriel that you have to find the thing that your enemy fears, and kind of, he doesn't say this, but kind of exploit it by giving them a means of conquering it. And that is what Sauron does with the Rings of Power. Essentially, he knows that men have this fear of their own mortality, and elves have this fear of their own fading and losing their lands and so on. And so that's exactly what Sauron does in the Second Age. And for me, that was the strongest piece of evidence that he could be secretly Sauron in disguise. For me, I don't think that he is. I think that we're being teased that in order to speculate, and then I think they're going to turn it on its head. And I think this week I moved away from even kind of entertaining the possibility that he's Sauron. So yeah, it's interesting scenes with him this week. We didn't get tons of him, but we actually got like quite a lot in not very much time with him, which is part and parcel of the better pacing this week. Anyone have any thoughts on him or anything I've said?
It would certainly raise a lot of questions if he is Sauron. Like the first one that pops to my mind is why save Galadriel at the shipwreck? I can think of no benefit to him there.
And why would he have a few surviving people around him at all?
Yeah. Like why would how would Sauron find himself in that position? Yeah. I don't know. And I mean, obviously he could just be lying, but like the orcs driving him out would obviously be, you know, I would assume a lie, because why would they, you know?
One of the things that makes me, when any of the theories of who's really Sauron, characters like Halbrand or whoever, when there's some dialogue, and then between two, him and one other, and then that person leaves the room, then it's just the camera and Halbrand. And if he's staring out into space and he's like got wet eyes, and I just don't buy that that's the villain. Like that, there's, as soon as they're alone, rarely they're gonna keep that emotion going to fool us. You know, I can't help but think that way as well. Like even from seeing things that characters don't see.
Right.
It feels dishonest if that's really Sauron and he's just keeping going in case somebody walks by and looks in. You know.
Like, and there's I've still got tears in my eyes.
Exactly, guys. But he's not the only one. If you look at other characters, the people are like, "Oh, is that secretly Sauron?" Just watch them when they're not being watched, and I feel like you're getting. It would really feel like cheating if they went with it anyway. You know.
Like I said earlier, I'm really pulling for like a candidate to be named later because none of the stranger, I'm like, nah, I'm pretty sold on him being a wizard of some some form or fashion wizard. I'm hoping for blue wizard. Adar, I don't think he's Sauron. He definitely had a strong reaction when Waldrig called him Sauron.
Touched a nerve somehow, didn't he?
Yeah, he touched a
I was
nerve.
very curious about that.
So the only thing I can think of, like in Two Towers, Aragorn says how Sauron doesn't allow his name to be spelt or spoken. And the only thing I could think of is like, you know, if that touches a nerve in that sense, like, hey, nobody calls me that. Like that's, you know, not what anyone's allowed to call me. So I'm gonna lose my cool. But I still I don't think he's Sauron either.
Someone who could be Anatar doesn't seem like they would lose their cool so easily, you know. And I don't.
Yeah.
And he would be doing a terrible job of keeping his servants from saying Sauron.
Yeah.
You know.
This is the face that he makes on screen here. I think any face that this guy makes is going to give you the willies, but
yeah, and also,
but he's clearly not happy about it.
Yeah, and this guy, I mean, obviously the theories about him, with him being an elf or whatever, he seems to have genuine emotion. It just doesn't seem to fit Sauron or Morgoth. Feeling bad for a dying orc is a stretch.
Yeah, he seems like a fallen elf to me. Like I think that's a pretty solid theory.
I think he's part of that trio of misdirection that the showrunners have given us, where he has moments where you think, "Oh, is he Sauron?" And then Halbrand has moments where you're like, "Oh, is he Sauron?" And then even the stranger, Meteor Man, has moments where like the fireflies die, or even in this episode with what happens between him and Nori, you're like, is he supposed to be like? There's so many ways that they can go with it. It's part of like what's frustrating, but also it's like exciting to try to figure it out and piece it together. You know, you were talking about earlier how this is for you like one of the better episodes for Galadriel and her character development, and I completely agree with that. This is, you know, there was a little bit last episode, but a lot in this episode where I was like, man, like, you know, starting to come around on her. I think she's doing great. I actually enjoyed the choreographed fight scene. I think that went pretty well, which Halbrand had his moment afterwards when he kick flips the sword up to catch it. But I think that this was Galadriel's best episode, and got to give her props to that. I don't know if it's the writing or just the fact that things are starting to finally come together. But I think that she was, for her, it was easily her best episode.
So I would say, because I've said that like Galadriel so far is actually my least favorite of the main characters. And like part of it is just that like we've seen in, you know, we've had 4 nights, you know, because there was 2 episodes in the premiere. So we've had like 3 consecutive weeks where someone tells Galadriel like, hey, you're kind of a crazy person the way you act. We had Elrond, then Elendil, then Halbrand. And so like to hear Galadriel acknowledge it, I was like, oh, this is something that resembles development. So I was very glad to see that, because she's just been so, like, to me, this is just my opinion, but she feels very one-dimensional to me. Like the only thing about her character is, grr, I've got to get Sauron, which is part of the reason why if Halbrand is Sauron, I'm going to be like, Galadriel's pretty dumb in the show if she's been looking for Sauron the whole time and she's been traveling with him for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I have a hard time imagining that in the long run that she would have helped enable Sauron's rise. Like that just feels wrong.
That comes back on Gil-galad though, because that is what he said in the first place. That was his justification for sending her away and trying to get rid of her.
He'd be right then.
It's like
that would make him right, and it would be an irony. And you can see them writing a plot like that, because very often, not just in Tolkien but in literature in general, when a prophecy comes about and you go out of your way to try to forestall that prophecy, you end up, you know, creating your own problems and actually basically enacting the sort of series of events that will lead to the conclusion of that prophecy coming true. And it's just kind of like a rule in literature in a way that sort of thing will happen. But I think the irony there is that Sauron is right under Gil-galad's nose, unfortunately, since that's not who Gil-galad is to me. But yeah,
it's hard to say whose nose he's under right now. I mean, I like Celebrimbor would be the easy one. Like he should totally be right under Celebrimbor's nose, like, you know, controlling him.
Mhm.
Like it would make sense if, you know, Celebrimbor was the one who got the advice from somebody, like, hey, find out what your you know, the person you're looking to manipulate fears, and then that's how he manipulates Elrond, by saying like, oh, your dad did it because he was the only one that could. And it's like, well, we know that Elrond has this daddy issue, you know, wanting to live up to dad. And yeah, like it feels like a you know, someone who's had some whispers in his ear from Sauron.
Okay.
And also his grandpa was Feanor. We can't forget that. So he's probably got a bit of that in him as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at some point, that's as canon as it gets in terms of like what happens in the Second Age and the story of the Forging of the Rings of Power, is that at some point Celebrimbor will be deceived, and we'll no doubt see that play out. And my theory is that that's already happening, and that none of the characters that people are hypothesizing are Sauron really are. I think Sauron is off screen somewhere manipulating Celebrimbor already. And yes, that would require some exposition, but I don't think it would be too much of a difficult sell for the audience at this point. So I think we just talk about Adar a little more as well before we move on. And maybe let's talk about Theo and the sword, because this is wrapped up in that storyline too. So we got some developments on that this week as well. We found out a little more about that. And there's this nice heart-to-heart that happens between Theo and Arondir. And Arondir says he kind of admires his bravery for being able to find the bravery within him to stand against the enemy at the age of 14, where it took him 200 years. And so we now have this. We haven't actually had a scene between these two properly yet. They've been on screen together, but we haven't really had any proper dialogue between them. So other than Theo's obvious distaste for the elves in general,
right,
which I think is probably some foreshadowing, we've actually gotten a nice character moment between these two. And this is when Theo comes clean and tells him about the sword. And we find out that that Arondir, that is, has seen this sword before. There's a statue of it actually there at the tower where they are, conveniently, which seems to be sort of teasing some sort of prophecy which is going to come true, I think, basically, because it seems to be that this is a carefully laid plan. We know this from Galadriel's kind of research in the Hall of Lore in Numenor. And so this sword is tied in with that. It has the same symbol on it. And the figure that we see just above, there seems to be like a kind of like skull-like helmet, I'm assuming is Sauron.
That was my assumption too.
Yeah, it looks like the kind of helmet from the movies. And this one scene that we have gotten of definitely Sauron looked very similar to the movie portrayal of him. So, yeah. But yeah, any thoughts on that whole plot line? This is my favorite plot line at the moment, by the way. This is the stuff that I'm kind of enjoying the most, probably consistently at the moment.
Well, I think the opening that we get with Adar in this episode, where he has the other orc with him, and he's like, "Let me see your arm," and he pulls the sleeve up, and the sun starts hitting it, and he's like, "How does that feel?" And that orc is like, "It feels like fire." And Adar, in turn, is kind of like, "It feels great to me, but I'm gonna miss it." He makes reference to, I think, trying to figure out some way to like block out the sun or get rid of the sun, as if he's gonna be able to do something that creates enough shadow, or maybe some sort of smoky haze from something possibly erupting.
Mount Doom.
Maybe that thing. I don't know what that is. I haven't read the books. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But maybe he's been looking for this sword that all orcs have reported back and said they know Theo has it. He's got the blade. And now Arondir is like, this blade is a key somehow to something, and maybe it's with the statue, maybe they have to take it somewhere. But I think the plot is moving towards Adar needs this blade to unlock somehow a version of Mount Doom in the show, and maybe it'll erupt and kind of, block out the sun, and the orcs can roam free much more frequently than they can now, where they can't go out in the sun for too long.
Yeah, I think it's totally like Mount Doom is going to erupt and make Mordor hospitable for orcs. I'm pretty sold on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, this show actually, one thing it's doing really well is portraying the relationship that orcs have with lights really well.
Yeah.
I haven't seen another adaptation do this as well. Showing them fearing the sun, unable to fight in the sun. That wonderful scene with Arondir like chopping down the kind of roof over their tunnel. The scene on the edge of the forest. So yeah, I agree. I think Mount Doom is going to erupt. I think this is what's happening here. I think this sword is tied in with that, and that's why it has the symbol on it.
Are you able to zoom in on that at all? Kind of like where the blade is towards the bottom. In chat, somebody's saying it kind of looks like there's a body under where the sword is, like they're stabbing into it.
Yeah.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, after that, there was a close-up of it too.
Does it seem odd that the elves would leave this here in their tower, which probably isn't an elf tower to begin with?
Yeah, so if you like in the Prime, like while you're watching it, if you turn on the X-ray thing, it actually says that this was these buildings were built by the servants of Morgoth who got relocated there, and then it was only later taken over as a watchtower by the elves.
Right.
Because that was one of my first thoughts too. It's like, why is this in an elven thing?
Yeah, I mean,
they're like, we'll put some greenery on it; it'll be fine.
Yeah, they cover it up. It seems strange that they keep it.
Yeah,
though. Exactly.
Well, you never know when a sculpture might come in handy. I guess.
I mean, as lore, sure. Like maybe make a drawing of it so that you can refer back to it.
Yeah.
They always store away scrolls with pictures and
that's right.
writing.
Yeah,
they can do that, but to keep around and presumably evil construction, and this is made by Sauron. Anything he makes is bad.
Yeah, this could show up.
And maybe it's a little bit of foreshadowing to needing some sort of blood sacrifice in the near future in order to trigger this Mount Doom eruption.
This is what I've been saying for a couple of weeks now, is that sword will be used to sacrifice somebody in order to make Mount Doom erupt. And I think that's where we're going with Meteor Man. And that is what the cultists...
You think Meteor Man is getting sacrificed?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, that is a shirtless man on the ground getting stabbed there.
Yeah.
So that would throw out any case of Meteor Man being like a wizard or anything then.
Yeah, I don't think he's a wizard. I think he...
Really?
Should...
Wow.
I came up with this theory on air with Robert a couple of weeks ago, actually, which I called it at the time tinfoil on top of tinfoil, but now I'm actually more or less convinced.
So who is he? Like people don't just fall from the sky in a meteor.
I don't know. I have a few different theories, but I mean, Robert thought he was a Balrog. That was his theory. I think that he's leading.
I do kind of like that theory.
That idea. Certainly, there's been a lot of kind of fire that's been talked about with him. Let's talk about him a little bit actually. So this week,
I will say,
the cultists.
Before we move on from Adar and stuff, one thing that ties the Adar to the Mithril thing that also makes me think the Mithril thing might be bogus is going back to his previous quote when he says, "You have been told many lies." He says, "Some run so deep, even the rocks and roots now believe them," which visually was very, very reminiscent of that story with the Mithril.
I'm gonna start posting that on Twitter and online, but fully take credit for it, Matt. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Several people have been tweeting that quote at me today because I've had things to say on Twitter about the whole Mithril thing. And yeah, it does seem relevant.
So you wanted to move on to Meteor Man, the stranger?
I think so. Yeah, let's talk about the cultists. So we got to we'll start with them, and then we'll talk about the other scenes with him. So we got a scene where we got a kind of flashback of the him lying in the crater site, and from obviously the end of episode 1, and then it faded, and then we see like how it looks now, and we see basically we see some occult dressed kind of ladies on the edge of the cliff, and then we see the Bridie Sasson's character. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
The Dweller.
The Dweller.
Yeah.
That is per the credits
That's-
at the end of the episode. That is her a title in the show, is the
The
Dweller.
aesthetic and the no.
I missed that. One thing I did catch, which I'm just trying to find the screenshot of now, was that we saw the kind of star constellation potentially on a kind of holy symbol that one of them's carrying, which was interesting.
I don't think it's a perfect match, but yeah,
No.
it's linked.
Here we go.
Notice there's no uniform look to them either. They have each have a different thing. One's wearing a helm, one's wearing
the one
holding
has a
staff,
helm.
one's got the mirror shield thing. It's
Now on the one with the helm has like what looks like an eye on the neck piece, possibly an eye of Sauron.
Don't have a screenshot of that, and I missed that. So
Yeah.
that's unfortunate. But yeah.
So can I tell you my favorite theory I've heard on these three? So I think this was from my Discord, or it might have been from our watch party the other night. The theory goes that these three are actually werewolves, and they are the same
Right.
wolves that attack the Meteor Man and the hobbits. And like knowing that Sauron is the Lord of Werewolves, like I think that would actually be really cool.
Well, that's such a Silmarillion thing, isn't it? There's no
Yeah.
werewolves in the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
You want to believe that they can go there, but it's even his connection to werewolves.
I mean, they did use the word Armenelos, which
there are elements.
isn't in Lord of the Rings or anything, so it's hard to say.
And it's not as if they're not adapting the story of Beren and Luthien here. They're just kind of referencing it, which I think they can do.
Which I think it might be, werewolves might be one of those things, like Gandalf, he kind of rattles off some creatures, and I can't remember which ones he references, but I think he might even mention werewolves in Lord of the Rings.
Is there any instance where a werewolf in Tolkien is a shape changer, or just a big wolf like Karkaroth, or they're always just
that's a really
demonic
good point.
wolves?
They are just
only
wolves.
Sauron is shape changing from one form to another.
That's a good point. Okay, I retract my theory. I like it a
don't
lot
retract
less.
I don't want to.
yet.
I don't want to.
Well, I'm not going to retract it, but I like it less because I kind of like got caught up in it.
No, it's a great theory.
Thinking, like they should just be straight up wolves if they are werewolves.
They're tracking Meteor Man. They have the same symbol he writes for Nori. They have that on the back of something that's already built, like they were kind of expecting him. There's 3 of them, and they happen to be on the trail for Meteor Man, and 3 of those werewolves or wolves show up to come after them at the same time. There's grounds for why it would be a believable theory.
Mm-hmm. And of course, werewolves being in kind of mythology very often tied in with the phases of the moon and full moons. And we had that shot of Meteor Man looking up at the moon, which kind of tied in with my other theory about him, which is that he might be Tilion.
Yes.
Which would be bizarre if it is.
Another Silmarillion deep cut.
Right, very much so. So my early thinking on this was that it could be related to the song that Frodo sings in The Prancing Pony in The Lord of the Rings about the man in the moon, and how that was like a longer version that Tolkien wrote of Hey Diddle Diddle, and how that became, that at some point presumably was part of like Hobbit folklore that got passed down, and that song was kind of a traditional song that came about through this kind of legend that was part of Hobbit folklore, and that perhaps the story that we're seeing here explains how that happened. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be Tilion for that to be true, but if it is Tilion, that would be another interesting possibility. It is quite a deep cut reference.
My money is still on Wizard for him. I'm really, like I said before, I'm really hoping Blue Wizard. My fear is that it'll be Gandalf, which, like, I mean, it would obviously be a big change because he's not supposed to be around for another, 1,000. Yeah, it's hard to say what year we are in right now with the
Who
show.
knows?
Who knows? But yeah, like minimum 1,000 years. And like I've said it many times on my channel, but like we know so much about Gandalf, and he's already been portrayed in live action iconically by Ian McKellen. So like it would feel to me like, a little shallow to bring in Gandalf, because it'd be like, hey, look, we have this character that everybody loves. He's in our show now. Come watch it. Whereas the Blue Wizards, canonically, by, speaking of Tolkien's latest writings, actually come in the Second Age. Like they are there, and they're kind of a blank book, like there's a lot to work with there. You could create some original stories with the Blue Wizards because it's open to the imagination right now.
What if this is some sort of unnamed being that goes back up to tell the higher ups what's going on down here and makes them send the Blue Wizards down in the Second Age for like season 2 or 3 or something like that?
Reconnaissance.
I like to think that he's the reason they use ships the next time they send somebody, because they're like, oh crap, like he doesn't even remember who he is. Like we need to.
Yeah, if this was somebody's plan to send this guy here, it hasn't worked
Amnesia
out the
Man.
way that they would. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I guess maybe he does know who he is. There's just a language barrier, I guess.
I can speak Quenya.
Yeah, 'cause
we
he
got
does
some
speak
we got some
Quenya,
more
so-
Quenya for him in this episode. Actually,
Right, yeah.
he says I forget the word, but it's
Arminiata or something like that. It's to heal.
yeah. I looked it
Yeah.
up earlier. It's to heal. Yeah, and he says color over and over, which is light.
Light, yeah.
And he can say snail.
And yeah.
Does it really seem like he's just learning languages, or he's also like grappling with the concepts of what it means to be dangerous, perilous, or good? That seems like that's
Yeah.
also like he's thinking about it for the first time, which really feels like a deep amnesia of existence.
Yeah, I think he's definitely like the he slams on the ground, does the shockwave thing, and then his arm is all bruised. I get the sense, again, like thinking wizard here, it's the first time that he's been put into a mortal form. So the idea of being in this mortal shell that is obviously much more fragile than his Valinorian existence would be something that he would have to figure out along the way.
Yep.
Yeah, he seems to be an incarnation. Like he's not a
He's
formless
really there.
Maya.
He's really,
It just sucks that Nori has been trying to pitch him as being like a part of the community for the whole season. Nobody wants him around. They're finally coming around to him in this one because he fought off the wolves, and then he goes and scares the crap out of her by partially freezing her arm for a little bit. And now
that's on her, man. That was a dumb move. Like you see the ice moving up, you don't grab. Like you should shake him on the other side of his body or something, not grab where the ice is coming.
Yeah, you're right. That was not
touch his sleeve.
I also kind of
not good survival instincts.
I had the sense that her being spooked actually had less to do with the physical harm, but like she saw visions. I think we were seeing it, but there was like we were seeing the meteor again. We were getting and the ominous music. It felt like she was getting some kind of vision from that as well, like as much psychic as physical in that moment. Just being thrown a little bit is one thing, but I feel like there's more to it.
I will say, for as much as I've ragged on the hobbits in this show, because I don't really see why they're needed, I did like the montage at the beginning. Like this episode was the most that I've enjoyed the Harfoots in this show so far. Like there was a lot of heart in that opening montage, and I was like, this is nice. And then Malva comes in and wants to like murder people and stuff, but that's a whole other thing.
Wait, you were talking about her actually before we went live, and I actually.
She's Sauron. By golly, that's Sauron right there. We found her.
I rather liked that scene because I really didn't like the direction we went in with them in episode 3, where the Harfoots were contemplating leaving some of their community behind to die. Just didn't seem very Hobbit-like or charitable in any way. And what with the justification for including hobbits in this story being we're familiar with them, they're our eyes in this story, they're relatable. And one of the showrunners saying just before the premiere at some point, or earlier this year, I don't remember when, but saying at one point that it's just not Middle Earth without hobbits. And to have them be so atypical, to have them be so primitive in terms of the way that they've developed their society at this point, it feels quite alien, actually. They don't feel like hobbits. Visually, they do.
Yeah, if they're
and
the heart.
There are certain callbacks to them, but we got the song in this episode, which was really nice. A lot of people have been enjoying that song. The lyrics are interesting as well. I'm thinking a bit about doing a video about that next week, actually. Not sure.
That'd be cool.
Just her song, or her song plus the one Sophia sang in a previous episode? All the live action singing they've done has been great. And hopefully they'll find a way to still incorporate that in season 2 without it feeling cheesy.
But what I was going to say is I really liked the scene with Malva, because actually that kind of put Sadok's decision in perspective, that he had pressure from both sides and that he was actually denying her kind of imploring to leave them behind, and she feels like the lobelia of this group. And for me, there's kind of precedent for that, because hobbits, they're not perfect, and even in the Third Age they're not a perfect society, and we kind of know that when we really think about it. It's in popular culture, it's often thought of hobbits as being this like idyllic society, but it's not quite accurate when you actually get to what's in the books and the way they're really portrayed. So yeah, I liked them more this week, is what I'm saying.
Shout outs to Daniel Wayman, because here we are 5 episodes in. His character has said all but 4 or 5 total words, and he has to do all of his acting just like with his eyes and his facial expressions. And like you still get those feelings of like what he's going through, and he's trying to figure things out, and he's getting frustrated because he can't figure things out. And that actor's doing all that without being handed script for dialogue for him to say things and tell us those things. So I think he's doing an awesome job as whatever Meteor Man turns out to be.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like I think I think with what little he's had, like you say, dialogue wise and everything, I've really enjoyed his portrayal, and like it makes me even more root for Blue Wizard, so that I could like see him as the definitive version of a blue wizard, instead of it being like, oh, this is Gandalf, so now I'm gonna tie this to Ian McKellen's performance and measure it up and stuff like that. But yeah, like a lot of the heart in the, as much as I said, I like that opening because we saw some of the heart of hobbits, like a lot of that was him interacting with them and like seeing him interact with the hobbits. So yeah, I am warming up to Meteor Man. Like at first I was like, this is ridiculous, a guy showing up in a meteor. And I think once we got over that, it's like, all right, he's here now, like we can, let's not worry about the arrival method. And then but I've enjoyed him as a character since then, and like seeing his powers start coming into play more was much more interesting to me. Like the previous episode where we saw them, I think episode 3, he didn't have a whole lot to do except stumble into the camp. So it was nice to see him like doing things now.
He seems to be having regrets about the incident with the fireflies, which
not very Sauron-like.
Yeah, no, not at all. I really don't think this goes Sauron.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Early on, I entertained that possibility, but I really think that's unlikely now. If he's a Balrog, he's a Balrog who's confused and doesn't know where he is and what he is, and he's having an existential crisis.
Yeah.
Maybe he just needs to get stabbed with a special blade.
Wake him up.
Energy, because he used a bunch of energy to move the wolves. Maybe that energy spurs on the eruption or the formation of Mount Doom, and then he's got to go walk, not to Khazad Doom. I don't want him to be Durance Bane or any Dwarf Bane.
Can I
No,
bring
I
up
don't-
something?
Please no. Yeah, go ahead.
Something about the wolves, or again, if they are wolves. In the beginning, we see after their entire travel montage, we then cut to the cultists arriving at the meteor, which is way back, right where they started.
Mhm.
I don't know how far this is supposed to be, but meanwhile, when the wolf things attack, that's closer to where they are now. That's further along, nowhere near the crater, right?
Mm.
There's the with the werewolf thing that I feel like those don't connect very well. They seem so far behind the Harfoots. If they're tracking the stranger, they seem very far behind unless they, But also, it does seem like the wolves are tracking them as well. Anyway, isn't it? I mean, we met them in the first,
Right. They were,
and they didn't attack
with
then.
the berries.
They could have, but didn't attack then either. They waited until they had the stranger there to defend them before they attacked.
Yeah.
That was a long. If
Yeah.
it attacked, there's so many places it could have done. It seems odd. I don't know what that means.
See, I don't think Meteor Man is Sauron, but I wonder if the cultists think it is Sauron, and that's why they're trying to find him.
Which is almost hilarious if they're wrong.
So maybe there's like an action set piece between them where they come and, think it's Sauron, and then it's like, oh no, this is a good guy who's got some power. We're in trouble.
Do we feel like there's a connection between the cultists and Adar? I mean, aesthetically, it doesn't feel like there is, but if they're kind of on the same side, or is, based on his reaction, I keep getting this suspicion that Adar sort of wants to be a usurper, like the talk of being a god, almost as though Sauron hasn't appeared yet, and he's trying to be that, take that place.
I've heard, some theories that like Adar is kind of like this person trying to come in, because there's an opening for a new Dark Lord, so to speak, and maybe he's trying to fill that void, rally the orcs, but then like maybe Sauron comes in and shows him who's boss, and at the end of the day, he's just a corrupted elf, and so Sauron disposes with him, and he's a one and done villain.
A season one villain as opposed to an entire series villain. Yeah,
exactly.
A petty lord.
Yes.
Yep.
We've been going for just over an hour, so I think I'm just going to do a quick little kind of mid-roll, just allow you guys to promote whatever you're working on or that kind of thing. So let's go in the opposite order again and start with Matt and go clockwise. You obviously you're on YouTube as well, Mr. Nerd with the Rings. What have you got coming up, and what are you doing?
So yeah, I've got my YouTube channel is Nerd of the Rings. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what I have for this week. So I actually have the video of me unboxing Theoden's helm coming on Monday. Tuesday is an interview with Maxim Baldry, who plays Isildur in Rings of Power. And then Thursday night, as we have done each week, we do a watch party with immediate reaction for hour, 2 hours, something like that after, and then breakdowns on Friday and my regular lore videos on Saturday. So got a full week for at least the next few weeks here.
Yeah, outrageously busy. I don't know how you do it. You're co-hosting on the Prancing Pony as well, I think, coming up soon.
That's in January. Yes,
not for a while.
Yeah, Alan asked me, and I was like, not during the season, not while the show is airing, because I'm gonna have my hands full, and that was a wise move on my part.
Yeah. So you just dropped a video about the Edine as well. I saw today.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
definitely go and check that out after this stream ends.
Yeah, that was a follow-up. Like ages ago, I did one on the clans of the elves, and following their migration and how they all break down. And so I thought, with all this talk of Numenor, and they dropped the name Edine, it'd be a good time to show how the first men awoke and how we got the three houses of the Edine in the first age.
And Varking, you're also doing lots of interviews at the moment. Did you want to sort of plug what you've got coming up on Reddit or on the podcast?
So every Saturday on Reddit, on the LOTR on Prime subreddit, we get a chance to interview somebody from the cast. Every week so far since the show has aired. We aren't guaranteed a talent every week. It goes live at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Any week that we don't have a talent, we will do a giveaway for people who are participating in the talk. We can actually call on people who are logged into Reddit, and they can come up and interact with us on voice and give their thoughts on the episode. But every Saturday, we've had Sophia, who plays Princess Disa. We've had Maxim Baldrion, who plays Isildur. We had on Emma Horvath, who's a Redditor herself, and she plays Aodian. And then this week, we had on Markella Kavanaugh, who plays Nori, the main character Harfoot of the show. And they've all been outstanding and a pleasure to talk to. But yeah, that's kind of what we're doing every Saturday, and just staying super, super busy.
Yeah, some really good discussions going on there. All kinds of theories. Like Reddit comes up with theories quicker than YouTube can by far.
Way too much.
Yeah,
Varking's got a wonderful community on Reddit, guys.
Yeah.
If you haven't checked it out, it's really good.
No, it really is. Yeah. Yeah. And Jeff, you have some kind of creative endeavors. You're a blogger. Did you have anything you wanted to promote or shout out to?
Well, I have no YouTube or podcast channels, but nothing particular to promote. I'm always doing something on Tor.com, I guess mostly, more recently because of Rings of Power. And I am working on something with Signum University Press, but I probably shouldn't go into that now because it's just too early. Yeah, so Tor.com is where most of my current writing is.
And I've just put a link to your stuff on Tor.com in the chat there, so if people want to check that out, I definitely recommend that. Cool. You were just talking yesterday, I think it was, this morning, about your write-up of your talk that you did at Mythmoot, which was excellent. Right. And so I definitely would recommend that to people too.
Thanks.
What do we have coming up on Voice of Geekdom?
Well, I mean, next week I'll be back with more guests. I'm not sure who yet, so I don't want to say too much at this point. But I will be certainly recruiting people in the next day or two, and I'll have some news on that soon. I am working on a video on the Harfoots at the moment and speculating where they could be going with the storyline a little with them. And then, as I say, I'm thinking about doing a video about the song, just breaking down like kind of that on a literary level and talking about the meter and some of the kind of metaphors that it uses, and the song, the traveling song that we got in this episode. I think that could be interesting to do. I don't see too many other YouTube channels doing that kind of content, so I think maybe that'll be interesting. Do
you have any thoughts on where they're heading? You said where they're heading geographically. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the episode that came out yesterday, I'm actually changing my thoughts on that a level.
Yeah.
Because we got a map and we got a trail that kind of points towards where they're going, which surprised me. I think we'll talk about that next.
Oh, cool.
But aside from that, I'm working on a long-term project where I'm doing a very long video on kind of Philosopher's Games length video on Tom Bombadil, which is kind of fun. Somebody that not many people are talking about with regard to the show, but I love him and I want to get across my essay length thoughts about him, thesis length thoughts about him.
Nice.
So that's going to be nice. What else am I've got a video on Gil Galad coming. So yeah, all sorts. So there's always content coming out, and I try to get things out as quickly as possible, even though I don't keep as regular of a schedule as Matt does. But stuff comes out when it comes out, and yeah, just stay tuned and make sure you click the bell notification button to be notified when all that stuff comes out, basically. But yeah, that's about it for me. Let's talk Harfoots, because yeah, I do want to talk about this actually. I was thinking about this with regards to this most recent episode, because we get maps and we get the montage, the traveling montage of the song, and they head south almost to the northernmost point of what we would call the Emyn Muil.
Right.
It looks like, and then they kind of circle around it and hit the west of what we would call the Dead Marshes, and then they kind of loop around to the east. So it almost looks like they're heading towards Gorgoroth at the moment to me, which is worrying.
See, I was thinking it looked to me like they were heading towards Sea of Rune, maybe.
Yeah, I think they're going
No.
north of there. They're not going
Okay.
into
Okay, cool.
into before door, I don't think. But they're
Before
kind
door,
of but they're going very close to there. And so yeah, it does look as if they're heading towards Rune. Yeah, I think you're right. Towards kind of where Dorwinion is. Basically, like as you said, the Sea of Rune.
I will say if Mount Doom does end up erupting, it could be a nice, like, another, kind of like the meteor was, like a nice event where we see reactions from, because presumably that would be viewable from a long distance. So that might give us a hint of where, the Harfoots are in relation to that, seeing it in the distance. Because I don't think that they're far enough away that they wouldn't see or notice Mount Doom erupting.
Yeah, I would assume that they would be aware of it on some level. Certainly, like in the books, there's kind of precedent for the hobbits being aware of Sauron as this kind of threat from the distant past. And we know from the Concerning Hobbits prologue that they came from the east, probably. What we don't know is what they were doing this far back in history, because Tolkien only tells us about them in the Third Age, which is kind of what my video is about. So it's interesting. I would expect them to end up further west by the end of the story, and we've got some time for that to happen. But at the moment, they seem to be heading east, which surprised me this week, actually.
Yeah, I kind of expected them to end up in the Vales of Anduin.
Exactly. Yeah, close to there, probably on the western shore of on the Vales of Anduin, kind of where we meet Smeagol and Deagol, basically. Would be my assumption, but it's not happening at the moment. They seem to be going to this grove as well, this kind of apple orchard that's been talked about, which is intriguing. I wonder whether we're going to be meeting, and this is a spoiler for my video as well, but I always spoil my videos on these streams. I wonder whether we'll be meeting Entwives at some point, because we're not too far from where Tolkien at one point speculated they were located, in the Brownlands. Actually, we're heading away from there, really. But
we did see Ents, as the meteor was coming down, like right before it actually crashed by the Harfoots, we did see like that very brief shot of Ents.
Do you think that's foreshadowing or just a cameo?
I don't know.
It's really hard to tell. It feels like it could have been just for now. And then since they haven't made the future seasons just yet, they have room to do something if they feel like there's a demand.
I mean, it would certainly, because we know leading up to the Last Alliance, Sauron burns the lands of the Entwives to slow the march of the Last Alliance. Like, that could be some pretty evil deeds that Sauron could do in the lead up to that final battle. As if we need more reason to hate Sauron, like that could be, him, burning Ents would be one of those things.
Yeah, it'd be really nice callback to something that they could include in that's part of the lore, and that would give a kind of another perspective on the War of Last Alliance. That's a prediction. I'm going to make this prediction here and now. I think that we're going to meet them as part of the Harfoot story, because they could do that without it kind of interfering with established history, potentially, because the Entwives are such a mystery, and the Harfoots are too.
It doesn't seem like the Ents and the Entwives at this era are together. And you can't have Treebeard interact with Harfoots. He'd remember.
Right. Yeah.
So you need you could meet Entwives, because they're not going to tell in the future. Right, but you couldn't have all Ents involved.
Right.
Yeah, we can't have Treebeard. You're right.
Yeah.
But,
I don't know if we're going to get to Numenor discussions, but one thing I can't help but think about when we see the maps is it's supposed to be so forested in Middle Earth right now, and we seem to be pre-imperialist Numenor, and they're going to shorten that, but they're supposed to be like, the deforestation that comes from their works. Are they going to get to that, or?
Yeah, I am so confused on what the deal is with Numenor. Like, they don't have any perceivable military, which
I
blows
know,
my
it
mind. I
does.
do not understand that at
It
all.
does. They're making them less evil in
Yeah,
the long
well,
run.
not even
Mm.
less evil, but less powerful, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I expected, given the, where we're at in the timeline, with especially with the Numenorian characters, like this would be the empire of Numenor, so to speak, where they've got port cities and they
But they clearly don't.
are like already brutally oppressing people in the south, and
Right.
like there's already conflict. That seems like a lot of stuff, if that's all going to happen with Farazan.
Yep.
That seems like it's going to be taken, like a lot of the nuance of those situations is going to be taken away, and it's just going to be him, brutally oppressing strangers. Like part of the tragedy of Numenor and the whole turning to darkness is the fact that they established these port cities, and they're like the elves were for the first men. They are
Havens.
teachers, and they are, friends of these people, and then they, over time, as they turn to evil, they start oppressing these people that were their friends. And that's part of the tragic the tragedy of Numenor. And so it'll feel robbed of that depth if it's just, okay, Farazan takes over, now we're going to start making port cities and we're going to be mean to everybody.
They might try to make up for that with just some intensity and some brutal scenes, but they can't. That sustained tyranny, they're gonna lose that.
And and you'll lose, like I said, you'll lose the whole, before that, when they were friends with, like that's the thing that I always look at with like places like Umbar. It's like they were friends, like they were teaching them, they were, they were a positive influence in their lives, and then it all gets twisted,
I wonder whether we're going to end up seeing the Black Numenorians go to Umbar, because Umbar doesn't seem to exist as far as we can tell. And we know from the Lord of the Rings that that's what happens, that's where they go, and that explains how there are men from the south that worship Sauron. And, and we're not, I don't know that we're not getting that, but maybe they will still do the imperialist side of Numenor, and we'll get there eventually, but they've got a lot of legwork to do to get there.
The no army thing is weird. Like, unless I'm still just hazy on it. Like, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what your guys' read on it was, but like that they took volunteers for this trip. I didn't know if that was like a way to make it less divisive politically in Numenor, to say like, oh, we're only taking people who want to go, instead of like, we're making our army go to fight this battle for an elf. But yeah, it was very interesting to me that they have this sea guard that Isildur and his friends are training to join. But then it also you get the hint that they don't have a military, so it's like, what do they do once they join the Sea
Coast Guard? It's just like a Coast Guard for their own island.
Well, they have the Sea Guard, and the Queen's Guard was mentioned specifically in this episode by Lendil.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think in episode 3 he said.
But I assume that's just like her personal bodyguards. That was my take on that. But they don't seem to have much of a standing army that we can tell. Somebody in the chat is pointing out that they only send 3 ships. Which,
I was like, don't they have spare ships?
I mean, they said they were going to send 5,
right?
And two blew up. So,
but like, you still like. I mean, it's Numenor. Like, surely they have extras, right?
You would think.
Like, sorry guys, we're down to 3 ships.
Let's talk about that plot a little, actually, because I'm really curious about Kemen, and I mean, I'm not sure I loved him kind of on a dime deciding to just indulge in an act of domestic terrorism like that and blow up the ship. It seemed like a sudden decision, but then I don't really have a good read on who this guy is yet. I liked him the first time we saw him, because he was being snarky about his dad and stuff, and kind of humanized him, and he was a little bit too smooth for me, the way that he interacted with the Aryan, which made me flip to disliking him.
Yeah.
And then in this episode, we get, as I say, we get him committing acts of mass arson, and it was very sudden. And what intrigued me about it, though, was that Isildur seemed to cover for him as well. He saved his life and then didn't tell Elendil what happened,
Right.
Well,
which I didn't understand.
didn't it
Yeah,
seem
like
like
what-
didn't he get his? Tell me if I have this wrong. It seemed like the only way he got his position on the boat was because an act of heroism. Like that's the only reason his dad was okay with it.
Yeah.
And so if it got out that he was stowing away, that would not happen. It seemed like they
Maybe.
both have to keep quiet.
Right. Yeah.
But I have a question. This is just a line that I didn't quite understand, and maybe I'm just reading into it much. When after the explosion, they're looking down, right? Up in the Farazan, and they're all looking down. Farazan says something about they think it's a passing brigand. Do we think that means just like a random arsonist from Numenor, or a passing brigand as in like a pirate came in and someone from the outside?
Yeah,
It's
I don't
like
know.
a passing throws me off. What does that
I think
mean?
the exact line was, "We have reason to suspect a passing brigand," which
Like Numenor has a problem with this, and they're not equipped for sea. Like, what's the Sea Guard doing? If that,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
They had one job, right? Didn't?
Yeah. If they're the Coast Guard, they should be guarding the coast, especially the inner port of
Yeah.
Numenor.
I would get if they don't normally used to having anyone attack them or any threats.
Yeah.
Like, we don't really. They have a jail, so clearly there's crime.
Well,
But
Isildur, I think, says that it was a barrel or something that
one of the casks
caught fire. Yeah, yeah.
which
that
seems
caught
a little
fire.
excessive.
Which
and
it's
like gunpowder explosion
right.
level.
Yeah, it's
a little.
It's like what? Why would the barrel explode spontaneously there, Isildur? That's a very specific theory you have.
Some of Saruman's black powder, I think, is
Yeah.
smuggled aboard.
maybe we'll get a scene next episode where Elendil will actually interrogate Isildur about that, because I wonder whether he didn't buy it either.
But
Yeah,
then he
maybe
wouldn't let him
Or
on board.
maybe-
He's already disappointed. Why would he let
Maybe-
him on board?
Well,
Maybe
it's a-
Farazan will interrogate his own son
That's more
to
like
find out
Yeah.
what happened there since they pulled you out of the water and you were close by.
Right.
Right.
If anything, I could see Elendil saying like, "Okay, I don't know what's going on, but I'm keeping you close where I can keep an eye on you because I don't know what you're up to." Maybe.
It's good to have stuff to talk about where it comes to Numenor finally.
Yeah.
What's your guys' read on Earian? Because she was very against this whole thing
Yeah,
happening.
that
in this
felt like
episode.
missing
Yeah.
scenes. To me, that felt like there was just
Maybe.
scenes cut out. Where did she become anti them going out at all for any reason? And not just that she was against it, she was like on the verge of tears about it. Like it seemed like we're missing something.
Do you have any insight on that, Varking? Because you interviewed the actress.
Yeah, so Emma Horvath and I are best friends, and we talk all the time. And when she was on one of our Reddit talks, the topic of cut scenes has been brought up, and it's one of the things where I've been hoping. And I know this is like a very Lord of the Rings thing, but I'm hoping when the season ends, maybe in like the X-ray extras, they'll be able to give us back a lot of these deleted and missing scenes, so we can kind of go back and parse through them, and you can get extra background on these characters and kind of what they were going through. Speaking of her specifically, in her storyline, they've been very worried about where Anarion is. And now at the end of this episode, you get that scene where she makes eye contact with Isildur, and he looks happy because he's going to go sailing. And she is literally having tears run down her face. And then you realize it's not just Isildur who's gone and Anarion who's gone. Elendil's gone too. And now
And the
what is
horse.
and Barrack is gone as well.
And the
They took
horse,
him.
yeah.
They took the dang horse. But like, what is this going to do to her character? How will her motivations change, knowing that her family just took this trip to Middle Earth, and the closest influences outside of the guild is going to be Kemen and Farazan? And I believe that it's a scene with Kemen and Farazan that has been cut from the episode as well. It'll be really fascinating to see where her character goes from here and kind of how she influences the Numenorian plot, because going forward, when we go back to Numenor, you've got Tar Palantir, who's on the verge of dying, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You have Farazan, and then you have Kemen and Earian, all the other main characters that were there are going to be on boats headed to Middle Earth to go help Lord Halbrand take back his Southland, titles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Aarion honestly becomes part of the King's Men faction, and like there's going to be a divide in their family.
That feels like TV drama for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
That seems like something.
And I don't
TV
think
writers
I don't
would
think
do.
she's ever leaving Numenor either.
Yeah, and I don't think so either. Unless, yeah, I don't think she. Oh,
No, I've talked to her about this
Ooh.
because here, check this out. Because she was kind enough to write my username in the Adunaic script. I have given her a handwritten invitation to when Numenor does the thing, she can live in Khazad-dûm with the dwarves. She's short in real life, so there's plenty of room for her to fit in. I will not allow her character to go down with the island.
I like the theory that she designed, because she's an architect. I like the theory that she designs Minas Tirith, or one of the cities. It could be, Osgiliath or Minas
That would
Tirith.
be epic.
I'm thinking more in line with
Temple
her
of
becoming part of the Kingsmen,
Yeah.
Temple of Morgoth.
Temple.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Temple of Doom, as Helen calls it.
Because
Her personal favorite theory that she's seen online is that her character turns into some sort of a Nazgul, in future seasons.
Interesting.
weren't they all kings or
Yeah, they
queens?
were.
Monarchs.
I mean, they were. Yeah, they were. Well, and I think they were all men too. I think it is said that they were all men.
And back in Numenor, we've got a lot of explaining from Kemen to do, because it seems like as smooth as he is with Eodian, he loses all that every time he talks to his father. He has no way with words at all. He's very blunt, and everything he says, Pharazôn has to correct him and tell him where he's wrong. And now he just did a stupid thing, taking out one of their own ships.
Two of their own ships.
Yeah, he's going to have a lot of explaining to do to his father, and a lot of growing up to do in a short period of time, I would assume.
I got the impression he was trying to take out all of the ships, and if Isildur hadn't caught him, he would have succeeded.
I will say, the writing for Eodian and Kemen has been some of my least favorite. It just feels very rom-commy. There's not really any poetry to it. The biggest glaring example is the if I see one, I shall let you know, or whatever. And it's almost verbatim what Jack Sparrow says to the two guards in Pirates of the Caribbean when they say it's off limits to civilians or whatever.
And it doesn't help it's a port city.
Yeah. This is, I've seen this before, and it was killing me in the moment. I'm like, I know I've heard that dialogue. What is that dialogue from? And I think it's been used other places, but I was thinking,
yeah, I've probably said stuff like that in real life.
Yeah. So and then the scene that you've just pulled up, the thing was oh, when I speak, he doesn't hear me, and it's well, speak louder, and it's okay. I don't know.
Well,
it was just dialogue that didn't really
I'll defend her, not because we're best friends, but because we're best friends.
I'm not saying anything about their
young.
portrayal at all.
So when you think about young people in the world,
yeah,
they don't have these epic proportions of dialogue that they're just coming out with on the fly. She's emotional. She's upset. I think she might have tears in this scene. She's very frustrated. She was trying to call to Pharazôn to talk to him rather than Kemen.
She was.
He shows up, and she's frustrated, and so she's just talk louder.
Yeah,
I really hope we get to see one-on-one her and Pharazôn. I think it'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think the scenes with that's what I was gonna say. The scenes with Pharazôn and Kemen are much better than the scenes with Kemen and Eodian, dialogue-wise. And I'm not saying anything about. I think their performances are fine. I'm not saying anything against the actors' performances, because I don't think it's an actor thing. I think it's a writing thing.
As the chat has said,
and an editing thing.
Loud, blowing up a ship.
Blowing up a ship is talking pretty loud. Yeah,
that'll get Dad's attention.
Yeah,
exactly. Pharazôn really does walk all over him quite dramatically, doesn't he? Very.
It's very Faramir Denethor.
Yes, it is.
Except Denethor,
he can go where he wants, do what he wants, say what he wants, and whatever he decides he wants to get, he feels like that kind of character that can talk his way into it. He has every guild's crest all over his outfit.
He's charismatic.
Yeah,
Denethor.
I know I shouldn't, but I like him.
Yeah,
I think we're supposed to
really
like
Farazan. Yeah, I
Farazan.
really like Farazan.
I don't think
I
he's-
love the depiction of Farazan.
Yeah, I don't think he's supposed to seem evil to the core at this stage anyway. I think you should see something in him that makes him human, and I think that's the right angle for now.
And I love that, like Kemen, like the scene with him and Kemen in this last episode where he's like, "Why are you going along with this plan?" You know, that Muriel has, and that was kind of like what a lot of us were probably wondering. You know, like I expected in the last episode, we saw that Farazan and Muriel were across the room from each other, and I thought that meant like they were gonna. This is where it was gonna start, where he was gonna go against what she was saying, but he went along with it and was like also like on the same page. And so we got this explanation where it's revealed that Farazan is playing this whole situation for his advantage, which I'm on board with.
It's very ominous too.
Yeah,
I like that much better. Yeah.
The other thing I liked with the Numenorians in this episode is when Isildur goes to meet his friends, when they're doing the little song and getting drunk, and he's trying to apologize, and they're like, he's only trying to apologize because he wants to get brought to the ship. And he's like, what can I? And he's like, see? And he's like, how can I make it up for it? And he's like, you know, you can hit me one time, anywhere you want, you know, gut, chin, wherever. And he's like, 3 hits. And he's like, how about 2? And he just wails on him 2 times, like on the surround sound. They thumped him good. I was like really proud of. I don't remember what that character's name is.
Valendil.
And the other one starts with an O, right? Like
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
I called the other guy Dwayne the Rock Valendil because he kind of looks like the Rock a little bit.
But they slugged him pretty good.
A very young, very thin Rock, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, of course.
Not very much. But
on the subject of audio effects, can I bring up something that is not plot related? It's just something that I find amusing. My brother, who's a sound engineer and musician, pointed this out to me. So they usually lean into this with movies and TV shows, of course, but once you notice it, becomes hilarious. So anytime there's a sword or a dagger, even a sheathed dagger, it'll always make that shwing sound no matter what it's touching. So a dagger getting pulled out of an orc, shing. Halbrand, when he forges the blade, he's got a cloth, shing. It's just nonstop. It's getting ridiculous. The Galadriel's sheathed dagger on the ship going to Valinor, when she hands it over, it makes the same sound. It's just like,
really?
Oh man,
I didn't notice that.
Go back and watch it. It's funny.
So another trope that we see in this episode is, which I said in my breakdown, I find a combination of hilarious and annoying, is the sword training, where people are 100% gonna kill each other if they hit anything.
If she isn't,
like if there is not like crazy acrobatics going on, like 100% someone is going to die, like if that happens in real life. But they do it in like every movie, so I can't like make it out like it's a thing unique to the show by any means, because it happens in so many movies and shows.
Sure.
But it just I kind of chuckled throughout this scene, because I'm just like, how many of these are killing blows, you know?
It's almost not fair, because I would think for Galadriel, if she's thousands of years old and she, like, you can buy, okay, in this case, right, she can dodge all of this. However, they should be stabbing each other, fumbling around with blades like that.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely, there should be some injury.
You know, my favorite part of the shot is, though, that we've got up on the screen right now, while everybody else is focused on what's going on with Galadriel and these 5 potential lieutenants if they get promoted, yay, you can see in the background, right in the middle, looks like Halbrand's got his back turned and he's just forging away, not caring about anything else going on.
He likes to forge things.
He does start watching later on, but initially he's not interested.
Yeah, to do the cool flippy thing with the sword.
Yeah.
I didn't want to like it, but while he did it, for some reason I did like it, and then I felt weird for thinking it was cool.
Did anybody else think, like, when Galadriel says, I've never seen, didn't she say like a blacksmith's assistant or apprentice or something like that do that? And you're like, oh, is that because he was once the apprentice of Aule the Smith, aka Sauron?
That's what I was thinking, only because other people brought it up first. But yeah, I went there too.
Then Galadriel will be single-handedly responsible for bringing Sauron back. Yeah.
I see comments about Kemen's hair. I think you're supposed to not like his haircut.
It's part of the character, I think.
Well, they've gone for kind of like a Roman sort of look for him, which is in keeping with the whole Numenor aesthetic in general.
I mean, and plus it adds to the fact, like, Farazan has this epic beard and he's like got this cool like salt and pepper thing going on. And then you've got Kemen, and you kind of get why he's disappointed in his son a little bit, you know?
Yeah. We mentioned Tar Palantir a little while ago. We got another scene with him this episode, and Miriel. And he warns her that she will only find darkness in Middle-earth if she goes, which is intriguing. In the books, as far as we know, she never goes to Middle-earth. So I wonder what she's going to see there. Clearly, I mean, there's going to be a bad end to this whole expedition because they're not going to be able to save the Southlands, because the Southlands will be Mordor. And so it's going to go badly. But she has to make it back somehow. So I wonder what she's going to have to sacrifice and where this is leading. Also, last point on this before I hand it over to the panel, I don't think we're going to be seeing Tar Palantir for very much longer. I think maybe the next scene we get with him is going to be a death scene.
The question is, will he die naturally, or as others are suspecting, and very Shakespearean if Farazan is involved, or if they're going to go, like, will he do that? Is he that level of jerk yet?
Yeah. I did enjoy that they had Tar Palantir, you know, kind of, it felt to me like a prophecy, you know, or like foresight more accurately, like where he says, you know, what awaits you there is darkness, which feeds pretty well into my, you know, Mount Doom erupting thoughts, like, because it's literally going to darken those lands. And, you know, we know that Tar Palantir makes the prophecy that if the White Tree ever dies, then it'll, you know, shortly after the line of the kings of Numenor will end. So I'm really hoping that we get that prophecy at some point from him. But yeah, I like what little we've gotten of Tar Palantir, and hope to get a little bit more from him before he does kick the bucket.
I love the fact that we've got him at all, because I wasn't actually expecting to get this character, and he's a really interesting one. Kind of a deep cut character to include in a show like this.
Yeah. The only thing I didn't like about that was, like, in an older episode, I think episode 3, where Muriel says that, like, he became more fanatic and, you know, like, being like having faithful beliefs, and it kind of like made it sound like the Palantir was the reason that he was faithful. Maybe not completely, but I don't know, that read a little weird to me.
Potentially. Okay. I think we've covered most of the stuff in this episode now. Does anybody have any final thoughts or anything before we wrap this up? Let's start with Jeff. Do you have anything you wanted to add before we leave?
You know, I took notes and now I'm not sure. Not necessarily. Nothing big, but you know, there's so much in the Harfoot song that's puzzling, right? So it comes from Poppy's mother, and there's all kinds of references just don't feel like Harfoot experiences. So I was wondering if anyone had thoughts about that. But one of the lines, much more innocuous, is, "My legs are so short," and I actually wonder about that, because don't Harfoots see other people as giants? Doesn't that seem funny to you? Like, it could just be intentional humor, but like from the perspective of a Harfoot. writing a song. Does that seem like something that?
So that
Makes-
their legs would be short compared to others, is how I took it. Like compared to humans.
I think
But
that's
that
how we're
seems-
supposed to take it, but she says,
But
my
do they-
legs are so short and the road is so long or something, doesn't she?
But do you think they see themselves as small as opposed to normal, whereas humans are giants? They
I
say
see.
giants a few times.
Right.
And also, by the way, is it Poppy does say the word human, which I never liked. That was just one instance. But she does say human once. After all the consistent men, mortals, whatever, like those are all great. And then one instance of human. But anyway,
On a similar note, actually, Celebrimbor at one point in this episode calls the Valar gods,
gods,
which I
after
didn't-
having just
I
called
didn't
them the
like.
Valar.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think only the men are, like it's hinted that the men, called them gods, but not like the elves. I would expect to call Valar.
The Valaquenta in the Silmarillion has a line
Whom the men
that
call gods.
kind of it implies that men call them gods. Which
And
so
early-
I didn't love that, but
Yeah, and earlier Elendil says "good gods." Like it sounds like such a modern use of that.
Yeah, it sounds like a very like generic fantasy thing. Like in
Exactly.
any fantasy show, like they'll say gods, good gods, So
It's
it
a line
does.
for the casual fan.
It is, and I think there was even I think it was a Harfoot who also said something like used heavens in a very like exclamation manner. Good heavens
anyway, it's
or
not
whatever.
it's not the biggest
No, it's
problem
not.
in the world, but
right,
it was something that stood out to me as a.
It's not
Tolkien
mithril
fan.
and the metaphysics of elves.
No,
It's
no, it's
not.
true.
We're going to be out of here in 6 months. We're fading right now.
Right.
All of us.
Yeah.
Varking, did you have any final thoughts or anything that we've missed that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, actually, it's something that I didn't bring up in the Reddit talk either as we were doing the episode breakdown, but there's still very minimal amount of footage left from trailers and teaser trailers and trailers of trailers that we've been given, but there's still a scene where Durin the Third says something like, "It's their time now." And I believe that this is for an upcoming episode where they're pitching that we need to be able to mine this mithril so we can save the elves. And I think it's Durin the Third telling them, no, we're not going to do that because it puts our own people at risk. If it's their time to go, then it's their time now. And I think that that's going to lead them to only having that little bit that they got. And that's what's going to be used to forge rings.
That makes sense.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the elven rings is made of mithril. Nenya is eventually becomes Galadriel's ring. So I've as soon as I saw that nugget of mithril and Elrond got given it, I assumed that was going to be Nenya in the future. But yeah, I love that tie-in with that scene that we've already seen. It's really good.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that we're actually, like Varking said, getting past trailer shots.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like when movies don't use footage from the third act in their trailers. So I guess you could you could kind of say that we're approaching the third act of this series. But usually when you're approaching a third act, you have a little bit more, of an idea of where you're heading. So I'm very curious to see where we end up going these last 3 episodes.
The scene where Arondir kicks the wall of the battlements we haven't seen yet as well. I'm assuming that's going to be in the next episode because we're headed towards a big fight there.
Charge on horseback and everything. Yeah, I think like Varking said, I think that the rest of what we've seen in trailers will be in this next episode, and then the last 2 will be totally blind. Unless presuming they'll give us some kind of teaser for these last 2, like they have been after the episodes air. But
Do you think the Balrog is meant to be in the season? Because that's a close-up. That's not the tree fire scene that we saw. That's something else up close.
I thought for sure that would be like in the prologue sequence, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I know, right?
I hate it. It's a cool shot, but it's
I know.
when we got invited to see the footage in Comic-Con and see it like the day before that it came out, we watched the whole teaser that they had played for us. And, you know, I was pretty hyped up and I was feeling good and I enjoyed it. And I've never done this before in my life. When they played the Balrog, I literally jumped up out of my seat in the front row. I feel bad for whoever was
You
behind
did.
me.
That
I jumped
was
up and
me,
yelled
by the
out,
way.
"No!"
That was me.
I am so sorry, Matt, that on the first watch through, I definitely flopped it. But I feel like the Balrog wasn't even. I thought in my mind for season 1 or 2, I thought it would be definitely in the future at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because they've already done the assets on it, it's got to come from somewhere. It's definitely coming this season. I just hope it's more of like maybe it's starting to wake up, but not quite ready to hug any sort of dwarves or anything.
Yeah, I think it could be almost like I guess you wouldn't say Easter egg, but I could see it like, you know, like them starting to mine the mithril, and then, you know, the camera like goes down like farther into the depths, and then a Balrog is revealed
where no character witnesses it.
Yes,
That would be fine too.
yeah.
Like that
Like
kind of
I
choice.
think that would be kind of a cool, like,
Yes.
just a foreshadowing, and not even tied to, like, we might not even see it, you know, justifiably we wouldn't even see it in this series, you know, because it comes much later in the Third Age, even after the wizards arrive.
Yeah.
But that could be a really cool, like, you know, you've heard that the dwarves delve too greedily and too deep. Like, this is the start of it. Just a reminder, this is what it's at the other end of this, you know, storyline whenever that comes. And it would always give that tension, like anytime, you know, in future seasons that they're seen mining mithril, it's like, oh, is this going to be the time when they awake the Balrog?
Do you think that that will be the conclusion of the Dwarven storyline? While I've got 2 of my 3 favorite dwarf-loving
Is Helen
Tolkien
the
fans
third
and
one?
people,
Helen's the third one, right?
She is not. the Dwaro Scholar is the third, which I think you probably.
I love his
Oh
content,
yes.
by the way.
Oh yeah. That's who translated this for me.
We did
Made
a
this for me.
podcast
Yeah.
with him probably about a year ago on the channel with Matt and him talking about the dwarves. So check that out if you haven't seen that.
There's not a lot of things that could happen in the show that would like actually make me really upset and start using some of the email access I have. And if I swear, if the Harfoots live longer than the dwarves in this show, people are going to hear from me. People will definitely. Do I think that that's going to be the conclusion? I think that will impact them in such a major way that if there's anything after that, it's kind of like how a small portion of the society tries to like pick things up and go elsewhere. And like, I don't know, man. Why you trying to make me sad on your stream?
I'm still hoping it's not going to happen. I think with them doing this myth with the Balrog on top of the Misty Mountains and that whole thing with tying that in with Mithril, I think that's probably where we're going, unfortunately. Yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to make you cry.
Yeah, maybe.
But dwarves do fight in the War of the Last Alliance, and
correct.
That's specifically stated, and I'm not sure whether that's in the Lord of the Rings or not, but I'm pretty sure that that's said somewhere. So I do expect to see that, and they fight on both sides as well, which is interesting.
And
so that could be an interesting place for them to go.
And don't they come marching out of Khazad-dûm? So there should still be a Khazad-dûm that they are coming from. That needs to happen before a Balrog wakes up.
I think, and we'd be cutting out 2 Durins out of the timeline, you know, because it's Durin the 6th that gets killed by the Balrog. That's the name for Durin's Bane. So, like, we can't have the Balrog come out without killing off Durin, you know, because he gets the name Durin's Bane. Like, otherwise, he's not going to get that nickname. And if Durin the Third, you know, which a lot of our theories are that he's probably going to die soon. Like, he seems, you know,
I almost thought he died in the chair.
Yeah, I know. I thought he was. I was like, oh, that'd be really tragic if he like swallowed his pride to go talk to his dad, and his dad is already dead. That would kind of undercut Elrond's nice tender moment. But yeah, so like the Balrog has to kill a Durin, you know, whenever it is revealed. I hope that doesn't happen and that Khazad-dûm, you know, ends the series. And like, you know, if they go on to do future stuff, then sure, do a season of a TV show that's the fall of Khazad-dûm or something. But
spin-off.
Yeah, or spinoff or something. But yeah, I hope that, you know, Durin joining Elrond in the War of the Last Alliance is, you know, something that comes from Khazad-dûm and not like the demolishing of his people or something.
Okay, I think we're winding down here.
I was gonna say I
had a
saw
super
we
chat
just got
here.
a super chat from
From
Plix saying
Plixie
great
Clocks, yeah.
conversation. Thanks for the civility. I appreciate you guys in the comments. I've been keeping an eye on it, and it feels nice to be able to hop on another person's stream or content. And when you read the comments, people are able to have a nice conversation, even if it is critical, without becoming, you know, more derogatory and name calling and stuff like that. Like the chat has been very amazing today. I appreciate you guys big time.
Agreed.
Yeah, the community is actually top quality. And mostly something I'm pretty proud of. Not the biggest YouTuber in the world. I don't have the biggest audience, but I do really, really like my live stream viewers. It's always a good vibe.
Yeah, this
So
is a
thank you guys.
great chat. Great chat.
Yeah, we have been trying to monitor your comments as much as possible. I've been reading them while other people are talking. But it's difficult to always like keep up with the chat, but I do really appreciate all of you guys. Thank you, all of you three lovely gentlemen, for coming on. It's been a really, really good chat, and it's made me think about different things in ways that I haven't thus far. So really appreciate the conversation. Thank you also to the mods as well for keeping the chat ticking over and keeping an eye on that. Before we go, I'll just give you guys one last chance just to let people know where they can find you and anything you want to give a quick shout out to before we close this down. Let's start with Matt this time, and we'll go clockwise.
So my YouTube channel is Nerd of the Rings, so you can check me out there. I've got all kinds of Rings of Power stuff right now, obviously with the show, but also doing lore videos every Saturday. And who knows what we'll get up to after the show ends? Maybe some Lord of the Rings online streams or something. Be fun. So yeah,
awesome. Varking.
For me, I'm really only active on Twitter and Reddit and Discord. But yeah, so the subreddit is reddit.com/r/LOTR_on_prime. It was made before the show had a name. Don't give me crap for it. But if I could give a shout out, I'd like to say, you know, I enjoy tuning in to these streams. I enjoy Matt's multiple videos each week. Corey Olson on Tuesdays, I think, does Rings and Realms, and it's like, I want to say bordering like 52 hours per episode right now. Like it keeps going up with each episode. It's really impressive. And then just, you know, some smaller shout outs. Watch Party LOTR has a podcast. There's like a Watch Party kind of network. And if you folks haven't discovered them, they're quality people. Highly recommend you tune into them and just appreciate both the bigger and the smaller community members and people out there. Thank you guys.
That reminds me, actually, the Watch Party podcast. Yeah, I've been on their show twice, actually. They're really good. And they're doing the Fellowship of Fans post, I think it's a Sunday night thing, a sort of a post-show reaction stream over on Fellowship of Fans. I'll be on there next week, I think, if I've got that right. I'm not getting my wires crossed, to talk about episode 6. So, yeah, I'll probably post that on my community tab at some point when that stream gets put up, but yeah, something to look forward to. Anyway, Jeff, anything else you want to say before we go out? And where can people find you? And what have you got coming up in your life? And anything you want to talk about?
Not too much. No, I'm on Twitter a little bit, but mostly I just have content occasionally coming out. No particular schedule on tor.com/author/Jeff-LaSala. That's about it. Otherwise, I've been increasing activity, engaging with folks like you guys. So thank you so much for this.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. All three of you, you've been wonderful, as I knew you would be. So yeah, that's all from me for tonight. I'll be probably tomorrow. I'll have that video out on the Harfoots, so watch out for that. And next week at some point, video on the Harfoots song, or maybe I'll save that for the week after, because that'll be too much Harfoots in one shot. Probably I'll have the Gil-galad video out next week. Let's go with that one, because that was the original plan. But yeah, that's all from me, and I'm going to end this here. So thank you. Bye.